Hi everyone, welcome to this fourth curriculum primer video. This one is about the aims of a subject's curriculum. And in many ways this perhaps should have been the third video. This should have followed on from session 2 on disciplines and school subjects, because two of the most important categories that I'll talk about in this video are this idea of a general and a specialised education, which I introduced in that video on how disciplines relate to school subjects. But anyway, the main aim of this video is to really think about what's often called curriculum intent. And I will go through an example of a curriculum intent statement. Now, you would be forgiven for rolling your eyes at this point and going, oh, another video about, becoming 21st century problem solvers or whatever these curriculum intent statements usually contain. But I hope you'll see that actually really being clear about the aims of a curriculum is essential if you're a middle leader thinking about how you could improve your curriculum. It's essential if you're a senior leader trying to judge the quality of a department's curriculum, if you're line managing that department or otherwise. And it really, the aims are going to frame everything you look for within lessons and within kind of broader units of work that have been planned. So while I think it is really helpful to write a curriculum intent statement, I know not everyone agrees with that, but I do think it's really, really helpful. It's only helpful because that's going to frame what you then look for when you're actually in the classroom judging how the curriculum is being enacted day to day. So when I'm thinking about aims or curriculum intent or whatever, what I quite often ask middle leaders to do is to think about two students, student A and student B. So student A is a student who already knows they are desperate to specialise in whichever subject we're talking about. So if it was in science, this would be a student who, they got the science kits when they were kids. They've read everything there is to read on Wikipedia, or they've watched all the David Attenborough or whatever. They've got lab coats and goggles at home. They go out and they do their own investigations, and they know that they, at university and beyond, they want to study and have a career in science or some sort of scientific profession. So that's one student. The other student, student B, this is a student who is kind of in some ways the opposite, who they kind of know that they are never going to do this subject longer than they need to. So for many subjects, they're going to drop at the end of Key Stage 3. For the core subjects, to use a slightly controversial term, they're going to drop them at the end of Key Stage 4. They're not going to do A-levels and so on. Now, what we need to think about as subject leaders is, how do we make sure our curriculum both prepares student A for further study in a really rigorous way, and we come back to the ideas that I used in the first video about rigor and accessibility. How do we make sure the curriculum is rigorous enough so that every student A that you have in your class is going to be given that opportunity to go on for further study, while not forgetting that most of our students are probably going to be student Bs, because we obviously do so many subjects in our as part of the school curriculum. So most students are going to be closer to student B, and we've got to make sure that even if they're not already interested, we're making our subject accessible so that they're going to come away with something valuable, even if they don't study our subject further. And it's worth mentioning, obviously student A and student B are kind of ideal types. Most students in our class are going to be somewhere in the middle and kind of a mix of the two. So when I'm thinking about how we do this and how we design our curriculum to make sure that it's appropriate for both students A and students B, I tend to think in terms of three kind of broad subheadings. So the three headings are everyday, general, and specialised. And actually, I think it's easiest to work this way for reasons that will be clear. So when we're thinking about the aims of our curriculum, I think the easiest one, the one teachers find most straightforward, is to say, well, okay, is our curriculum offering a kind of suitable, appropriate, sufficiently rigorous training for further study? And that's easiest because we tend to have studied our subjects in greater depth, so whether at A-level or degree level, and we can therefore think, okay, is what I'm teaching going to prepare students to go on and be successful at a higher level of study? so that is relatively straightforward. And when you're looking at a curriculum, whether you're looking at the intent statement, whether you're looking at lesson resources or kind of midterm plans and things like that, when you're looking at individual lessons, one lens you can use to look at the quality of a curriculum is to say, to what extent is student A getting prepared to go on and excel at the next level of their study? Are we challenging them enough? Are we really equipping them with the concepts that they need to go on further? Are we practicing the kind of skills, to use another controversial word, but are we practicing the kind of things that they're going to need to do fluently by the time they get to A-level or beyond? So that one is relatively easy to look out for, and it's one that I think teachers tend to be fairly comfortable with. Now, if we think about another aspect, so the general aspect of this, this is making sure that we are giving all of the student Bs in our class. Remember, student Bs are going to be the majority, so this is the majority of our students who probably aren't going to study our subjects any further after they leave us. So the first thing we can look for is, are we equipping our student Bs with some useful knowledge from our disciplines? So this is knowledge about the world, if it's one of the sciences, let's say. This is knowledge about society, if it's one of the humanities, or knowledge about art, if it's one of those art subjects, you know, English, drama, music, art, and so on. And are we preparing students to go out into the world? And I think this is kind of what E.D. Hirsch was referring to when he talks about cultural literacy. Are they going to be able to have those conversations with people and just get on with others in society? These shared understandings that kind of unite us within our society. And again, that is going to come out through individual lessons, but it's also one that we can look for in kind of broader curriculum plans to say, to what extent have we made sure that students are going to come out being knowledgeable people ready to enter society? The second part, this is a bit more subtle. So knowledge of self, because a really important part of every student's general education is that they understand themselves a bit better than they did when they came into school. And what do I mean by that? Well, we kind of want students to understand themselves, for example, as biological organisms. So I guess this is a kind of public health thing, but actually there's lots of mechanisms which our bodies follow. So I don't know, this might be to do with exercise, it might be to do with diet, things like this. It might also be to do with reproduction and things like this, but we've got to have an understanding of ourselves as a biological organism in order that we can make informed choices and ideally live happier, flourishing lives. So that would be one thing to look for. Historical, so what we want is for students to understand themselves as historical beings, not entirely separate from the past, but actually shaped by the past in terms of the way we make decisions and the way we think about things. The past is not something completely alien, that's something that shaped who we are today. And we want students to recognize that by the time they leave school. And finally, moral. We want students, let's say, we often get this through art, but if a student's read A Christmas Carol and they've learned about Scrooge, we kind of want that to inform their own moral decision making and the way they come to their own moral judgments. And when you're looking at a curriculum, if you're a middle leader trying to improve it, or a senior leader supporting a middle leader trying to improve the curriculum, these are the kind of things you can look for and say, okay, to what extent is this made clear in your subject? Are we just presenting them with a load of kind of facts, or are we giving them an account of how it is that this relates to themselves as human beings? And I think this is often overlooked, and it's quite a subtle one. It's quite a difficult one to look for. But this is the kind of thing that you can look for in classrooms or in curriculum plans and so on, to say to what extent are students recognizing the fundamental importance of disciplinary knowledge to themselves. So that's another thing that's a really important part of a general education, another aim of a general education. The last thing is the final aim that I've included about a general education is that we want students to have this kind of integrated base of knowledge. So it's not just to see the knowledge of all the disciplines as just kind of random discrete facts. It's to see disciplinary study as kind of one holistic enterprise. And the reason that's important, and this goes back to the kind of earlier version of what I'm calling a general education, which is a liberal education. But to be able to live in a liberal democracy, you need to be able to take other people's perspectives. And the reason we study multiple subjects together is to practice taking different perspectives. So looking at the world from a biological point of view, looking at the world from a historical point of view, looking at the world from a moral or an aesthetic point of view. And if we can take those different perspectives, the idea of a liberal education is we essentially become liberal ourselves. We understand that there are more points of view in the world than just our own, and we're able to therefore lead better, happier, more kind of civic lives within society. And again, when you're, how does that relate to what middle and senior leaders actually do day to day? Well, to what extent have we made it explicit to students how the knowledge in our subjects is distinct from the knowledge in other subjects? So in science, for example, I really want students to understand that the way scientists generate knowledge is by coming up with models that offer a kind of explanatory power about the natural world. And they test those models, and that's why scientists do experiments, because they want to see whether or not their models are correct. That's very different to how knowledge is generated in English, let's say, or through art, where actually the kind of the novel or the poem or the work of art or the piece of music in itself, it contains its own meaning. It's kind of its own little world of meaning that we can then draw upon when we understand situations in our own lives. So somewhere, and I suppose these two really relate to what's often called disciplinary knowledge, which is kind of different to this stuff, which is the substantive knowledge. But have we made it clear how the knowledge, how what students study in our subjects relate to ourselves, but also how it relates to the other subjects? And again, that's something that you can look for in your own subject. Have you made explicit how knowledge in your subject is distinct from that in other subjects? And especially if you're a senior leader looking at the curriculum as a whole, are we giving students a message about how all of this is kind of related to one another? Because I think that's really, really important. And then what's often forgotten is the fact that students, they're not empty vessels when they come in. They're not just there to be filled. I know those metaphors are always a bit controversial, and there's been lots of debates about those, but they do come in with some sort of knowledge. It's just not the kind of disciplinary knowledge that we want them to leave with. So when we're looking at how a curriculum is being implemented and enacted within a school, firstly, we need to ask, does the curriculum address the kind of intuitive, everyday, basic understandings that students come into school with? So what I mean by that is many students in science, for example, again, drawing on my own subject, they have some quite intuitive understandings. I might even call them naive understandings about how the world works. So the one I often give is this idea that when you open the fridge door, coldness comes out of the fridge and hits you in the face. What we want for them to be, to have this kind of general knowledge, this useful knowledge for society, but also to be ready for further study, is to understand that energy is always transferred from hot to cold. So actually what's happening is there's just there's a rapid transfer of energy away from our bodies into the fridge. So what's important here, again, if you're a middle leader or a senior leader examining the curriculum, is that you're looking for those things. Are we taking the ideas that students come in with, and is our curriculum explicitly addressing those and making sure that students have a different understanding by the time they finish? So if this was in English, they're going to have all sorts of ideas about the themes that are covered in the great text. So love and guilt and greed and whatever. They're going to have ideas that they come in with, but they might be a bit simplistic, a bit superficial. How is our curriculum making sure that we develop their thinking to one that's more appropriate from a disciplinary perspective? How are we making the concepts that they have more sophisticated? Another one might be that they're going to come in and they're not really going to think about themselves as selves, as constructed according to the rules of biology or history or the kind of moral rules that get expressed through art and so on. So we need to make sure that actually through our teaching, we give them a sense of who they are from a disciplinary point of view. And again, that's a harder one to look for day to day. It's not like something that you can easily, make an actionable step for. But it's one to look for, the extent to which that point is addressed throughout the whole curriculum. And then, the other part is knowledge fragmented? So are students within lessons, are we treating knowledge as if what they learn in science is completely unrelated to what they learn in history? Or are we addressing that point by saying, as I talked about here, how knowledge in each discipline is distinct? So those are the kind of things that you can look for to make sure that we're going on this journey. So those are some of the things that we can think about in terms of aims. What I'll do just to finish off this video is share an example of how you might turn that sort of thinking into a curriculum intent statement. So this was written by Darren Woods, who's the head of science at Brackenhill School, which is one of our Greenshaw schools. And I think this is a really nice example. So if you just pause the video now and have a quick read through this, I'll then talk about it very briefly. So pause the video now. Thank you for pausing. What I really like about this is that, firstly, you can see a really clear, what I would call a progression model here, from students' everyday understandings into more sort of the general understandings that we want all students to leave with by the end of year 11, and then even further into the more specialised understandings that we want students to have if they're leaving at the end of year 13. And how is that made clear? Well, we talk about young scientists, and what we want them to do in the first instance is have these mental models that describe and explain how things work. So it's taking some, it's kind of building on their everyday knowledge, and it's talking about everyday phenomena, but giving them the models to explain that in a scientific sense. So that's a kind of general aim of education. And there's also the fact that we're talking about models and how we test those and so on. That's bringing in this idea that science has this distinct way of generating knowledge, which is going to help them understand that that's kind of different to how English or geography or history or whatever other subjects generate knowledge. So that's really helpful. And what you can see is then, I also really like how this curriculum progresses. So we've got this idea, it's moving from qualitative to quantitative. It's becoming increasingly abstract to the point where by the time they get to A-level, they're deconstructing and rebuilding these models. And you can see this progression from everyday to a kind of general education that everyone's going to go away with. So making sure that all the student Bs are coming away with something. But it's also making sure that the student A's at Brackenhill are then going to have an opportunity to go on and study at an even greater depth. So I think this is a really, really lovely curriculum intent. Now, of course, while this is really, really lovely, what's important then is that this is a document that's used live and in the moment to frame all of the feedback that's then given to teachers within that department. So what's important is that then, if we're observing a lesson, we're saying, well, okay, I'm observing a year 10 lesson. To what extent are students actually applying the models that they picked up in year 7 and 8 and really deepening their thinking? If we're still introducing models in year 10, well, that's a problem. We're not, our curriculum is not being rigorous enough. It's not taking students far enough beyond their everyday knowledge. So the point is, this is not a document that just gets written and then sits there. It's a document that informs every conversation that then happens within the department. So I hope that's clear when we're thinking about aims, how aims are going to frame everything that subsequently happens within the department. And like I say, not everyone is a fan of conversations about aims and curriculum intent, but I think they're really, really, really important.